So today is October 13th, 2023. My name is Karis Lai, and I'm here today with Wendy Liu on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University. So let's just start from the beginning. And could you please state your full name and when and where you were born?
Hi, my name is Wendy Liu. My Chinese name is Wenliao. And I also have a stage name of Wen Liu. So that's a long introduction. I currently work as a geosolution geophysicist for SOB, also known as Schlumberger Geosolutions. And also I am a producer and film scoring musician for LiangChen Film Studio.
Nice, awesome. So I guess starting all the way back at the beginning, I noticed on your survey that you have one sibling, and I was wondering first, are they brother or sister?
It's a little brother 10 years younger than me. I was actually his legal guardian over his high school years.
Wow, really?
So, yeah, when he was 15 and I was about 24, 25, I was 2 years into my career and I was able to buy a house at the best public school district in Houston and have him come all the way from China to the US to live with me. So I played the role of dad, mom, and a big sister. And I also kind of help him with schoolwork and extracurricular activity planning, college application, and he ended up going into UC Berkeley.
Wow, that's crazy. I'm so impressed. Was that like a very, like, do you feel like that changed your life trajectory at all, being like that
Yeah.
person for him?
I realized that I'm more than a nerd, right? I can be nurturing as well, not necessarily always a nerd. And that is also, it was I was actually I had my first official song during my brother's time here. And that was because my family visited us. And when they were leaving after that 2 week visit, my mom, or actually, long story short, it's my stepmom, it's my brother's mom. And she was holding her boy, crying, doesn't want to leave because her, airplane going back to China is in 2 hours, and she was crying. And that scene just triggered me. And I wrote a song basically saying, it's okay, your children's flying away. Please go find your own life because your children are going to find their lives and they're always going to love you. And that's my first official production. So, yep, that changed my life.
That's an amazing story. Going back to your early life, how would you describe the household or neighborhood that you grew up in?
So I grew up in Chengdu, China. Chengdu is a big city in China. Chengdu to China is sort of like Houston to the US. It's actually on the roughly same latitude as well, same climate, more humid than Houston, actually. We have, it's a pretty urban setting, and I grew up living in buildings of apartments. I was an introvert growing up, so I didn't get to play like, if you grew up in rural areas, you get to play on the farm and climb trees and catch fish. I don't get that luxury. I love to, stay in my room and read. That is kind of what I do, and obviously play music. I always loved playing the piano and singing since I was young. So in terms of the upbringing experience, I grew up in a big city. I'm kind of an introvert, and I spend most of my leisure time doing quiet, stuff on my own, such as reading and doing music.
As a fellow like introvert, and I did all the things that you do, I can definitely relate to that. A big reader,
Yeah,
big singer. I love singing. I was wondering what your parents' occupations were when you were growing up.
sure. So there are three very important adults in my upbringing: my father, my biological mother, and my stepmother. And my stepmother became my guardian when I was 6 years old. She is very kind to me. My father majored in physics, and I followed his step. He went on to get a master in finance and economics and became a businessman. So he is an entrepreneur. He proudly has, been financially successful, and he has, been in investment for different industries. Right now, he lives in Irvine. and still has business in China that he runs. So my biological mother left me. Well, she didn't leave me. She didn't mean to leave me. It's just a divorce, and I was given to my dad. She went on to get a PhD in Japan, and then after that, she became a professor at Fudan University, which is like Yale or Harvard in China. So Fudan University in Shanghai. And then my stepmother, she has always been a government clerk. So all three of my parents, so to speak, are educated. They got college degrees or more, and they have been having a job in the industry. My dad has been, in business. My biological mother is in economics, and my stepmother is actually, she's a English major and does a lot of translation work to all of those diplomacy stuff. So
I see that you have very smart genes in your family.
well, I don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think my brother is much better off than me. He is already a PhD in computer science at UPenn, which is an Ivy League school. I'm very proud of him. So yeah.
Wow. I was wondering in what ways, I guess you kind of alluded to it in the way that you followed your father, you said into like the physics type path. But what ways do you feel that you're most similar to your father or your biological mother or even your stepmother?
Sure. I have inherited my father's analytical skills. I probably don't have his business talent, playing the game, networking with people, sometimes have to be aggressive and have a thick face, right? So I actually don't have those aspects, but I do have his analytical skills. So I'm very logical, very rational, sometimes very nerdy. So that is coming from my dad's side. And from my mom's side, I would say my biological mother is, even though I was not raised by her, I still inherit a lot of things from her. Mainly is the understanding of the emptiness of life. So some people are very down to earth. My dad is one of them, and they get pleasure from everyday joy, such as good food or getting, respect from people or getting money or getting a good job. All of those things make people like my dad happy. But then to me, just like my biological mother, those things are kind of empty to me. I feel like, okay, what's the meaning of all of that? Why are we doing all of this here? Oh, okay, this food is delicious. What's the point? So I would think about the philosophical part of things and the meaning of the universe, why we're here, the meaning of human race. All of this big thinking, I think, came from my mom's genes, so to speak. And then my stepmother, she has basically infused to me all of my routines, such as my taste of food, taste of fashion, and just my everyday routines preference, like my circadian cycle, how I prefer my bedroom to look like. All of those very little detailed things in life was inherited from my stepmother, because she basically demonstrated to me how to do them when it was the age for me to learn those things. So yeah, hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that was a very insightful answer. I think it's super cool to kind of see every facet of your personality, how it's been influenced by each of these parent figures. I was also wondering, like, what were some of the values that your parents emphasized during your upbringing?
Sure. I would go into two values that was emphasized to me. One of them I adopted, one of them I chose not to. So the one I chose to live up to was the value of always being humble and never feel that you're good enough. So that is that could be a very Asian stereotype. And that's something that my parents always taught me to live up to. So that starts with this educational fairy tale that a lot of Chinese parents tell their kid, and my parents told me. So the fairy tale goes like this: there's a rabbit and a turtle, and they're racing. They're, having a race from point A to point B, and whoever gets to point B first wins. And then obviously the rabbit is a lot faster than the turtle. But then at the end of the story, the turtle won the race. And the reason is that the rabbit feels so good about himself that he said, oh, come on, there is no way I can beat this turtle. So as he was racing, he was distracted a lot. He's like, oh, let me stop by here. Oh, let me go check out that. Let me take a nap. And the turtle, even though he knows he's slow, he just keeps crawling, crawling. He never stops and he never gives up. So surprisingly, because the rabbit spent too much time doing other things, distracted, he ended up missing the destination and the turtle got it first. So the turtle won the race. So the point of this educational fairy tale is to teach children to never be like that rabbit. You always want to, even though you know you're good, like your rabbit, you run way faster than the turtle. You don't want to say, okay, I'm good. I feel good and let me just relax and be distracted. And always feel like, okay, I'm pushing myself to do even better. I need to run even faster. I need to be more focused and determined. That is the value that I got from my parents. And, looking back, to be honest, I think a lot of people will think I'm an overachiever. I always was the #1 student in class in terms of grades. And I was the first to be accepted to Rice University from Southwest China. And I was interviewed by some newspapers when I was accepted because that was news. But I never felt I was good enough because one of my classmates got into Harvard. So I just feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. I didn't go to Harvard, right? And then I always was good at music, but I obviously never thought I was good because I didn't go to music school. At Rice, I have taken every possible music course open to non-majors. The Shepherd School of Music is freaking hard to get into, so I'm not even going to try. But I took every class possible for non-majors, and then I paid $6 per hour to my classmates in music, composition or piano majors to teach me. And that's my dedication. But still, like right now, I have a music video recently released and all that. And still think, oh, no way, I'm not good enough. And in one sense, I feel like, honestly, I know that I'm making progress and I know that I'm already better than average musicians. However, I need to have this, key value infused in me to say that I'm not good enough so I can keep getting better. So that's a value that my parents got into me that I'm practicing. And another value I want to share that I did not adopt was how, like, my parents said, you have to live to the expectations of others, let it be the society or family needs or parents. And I think a lot of my family members, the older ones, are like that. For example, my grandmother, she is very proud of herself because she believes she has fulfilled a responsibility of a wife and a mother. And she, like, the most proud thing that she says is, at her father's deathbed or something like that, he held her hand and said, "You're good. You brought honor to my family." And that means a lot to her. And this is great because she is really living to the expectations of her father and her husband and her children. And to me, I feel like everybody's kind of having to be responsible for themselves. So instead of thinking like, okay, I'm doing this to please my dad, like how it's like so famous that a lot of Chinese parents are pressing their kid in their late 20s or early 30s to get married and have kids because they're so worried if you don't do it as a girl, then you're too old to get married. Nobody's going to be attracted to you. And then when you're old, you don't have anybody to take care of you. And I just don't care for that. I probably would not ever have kids. And I'd rather spend all of that time focused on my second career as a musician and now a film producer, because I think that's one way for me to express myself and to actually to help me become a better person, to complete myself. It's more like a salvation, what I'm doing. And I feel like for a lot of people, they don't think about what is the true salvation for themselves. They just think, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do at this age because the society wants me to do that. The society gives me resources to do all of those things. But to me, I think, what is my salvation? What is the thing that will really cure me and help me find meaning? And as long as it's not hurting anybody else, as long as it's not in conflict of what my parents want out of me, what society want out of me, I would rather pursue that individual pursuit. So that's a value that I did not agree with. So yeah.
I think that's really interesting. I don't know if you've ever read the novel The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, but it has a very similar type of feel where she talks about how people often live secondhand lives where they're so busy like living for like the opinions of other people, they like lose themselves. So I think like it reminded me a lot of what you're saying, and I think that's just very admirable too, that you were able to kind of like identify what was being told to you and then finding another path as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I would like to add, if this, whatever I want to pursue for my own salvation is going to be in conflict with like my family needs and all that, then I will definitely think twice. But I have the pleasure, I'm very lucky that I don't have a lot of family responsibility like people of my age typically have, because number one, my dad, he has been financially successful. Therefore, at least at this point, he doesn't need me to support him, right? And it's probably going to be a long time before he needs me to support him, both physically committing my time and financially committing my money. So I get to do whatever I want. And also my biological mother, after the divorce, we reconnected basically when I grew up. When I was 16, 18, we reconnected and it went out great. Now she's an awesome friend. She became a professor at Fudan University, and a decade later, she became a committed Buddhist. So she has cut off her secular connections, and she now lives in a temple. So obviously, she also will not expect my support. And actually, you're expected to cut your secular connections once you do that. So I would say that I'm not proud of like, oh, I'm just being selfish because I do what I want to do. I think my special family circumstances allows me to do that, and I think it's very lucky of me.
No, that definitely makes sense. Kind of following off, so you mentioned that your mom ended up becoming Buddhist. Were you raised religious at all, or does your father or stepmom practice a religion?
I don't believe so. If they did, it's not given to me at all.
Got you. I kind of want to then go back to your interest in music as well as
Mhm.
physics. When did both of those interests first start for you? I know you mentioned that you had always just loved playing the piano. So when did you start doing that?
Well, it was a typical Asian thing that people want their kids to learn an instrument. So I was one of those kids. But what's different about me is I always try to go out of the way and do some chord progressions and compose, improvise some melodies that is not taught by the teacher. And at first, it was very discouraged. Let it be the music teacher in school or my, private music teacher and my parents and also my grandma. My grandma was actually in a choir when she was young, so she's musical. But all of those people did not encourage that behavior. Instead, they said, Wendy, be good. Just play whatever the teacher assigns you to play. Practice this piece note by note. Don't do this nonsense chord progression or melody. This is, disobedient. And later, what I realized was that I have a talent of music composition, and it was not recognized by my teacher, my classmate, or my family. And once I realized that, which is probably my puberty, I almost gave up the piano practice. I'm not very good at it anyways because my hands are small, and also my muscles, I just never built them very strong. So my piano playing skills are totally mediocre, but I get to learn music theory and I'm able to compose some really good music. So yeah.
That's great. Were your parents supportive of like your musical interests growing up, or were they more supportive of like STEM side of things?
I would say I never voiced my strong passion to music to my parents. And I always knew that I was going to major in physics. So I never thought about majoring in music or give up my, coursework for music dedications. Actually, I fell in love with math at, third grade, and I fell in love with physics in eighth grade, pretty much the first time I got to learn physics. And at that moment, I knew I was going to be a physics major. And back then I had this ambition, gosh, today it sounds so silly, but back then I had the ambition to be the next Madame Curie. I was hoping to be a scientist and win Nobel Prize. And I don't think it's happening, but it's just nice to think how like I truly have a passion in this field and I pursue this field. So majoring in physics at Rice was a non-brainer. I definitely know I was going to do that. And it's only until the senior year I realized that I started getting B's in solid state physics. I got a B minus, and then I got particle physics. I also got a B. And then that's when I realized, okay, my intellectual level may not be as good as Einstein or, Madame Curie. But yeah, I always love physics and I still do. And I think there are two ways that people can connect to the universal truth and beauty, no matter what culture or race or gender or country you're from. That is through art and through science. So, which is why I kind of commit in both of these fields. I commit to science and by majoring in physics, no matter whether you're from China or the US or Israel or North Korea, you will always agree on Maxwell equations, and you can always derive E equals mc squared from Maxwell equations. It's universally true. And then no matter where you're from, you will always understand beautiful music, beautiful movies, beautiful art. And so I always know that I want to pursue this because these things make me feel safe because I know they're universal truth and beauty. So hope that answered your question. I was digressing a little bit.
No, that definitely answered the question. I think that's really beautiful. Kind of last question about just your pre-college experience. How is your experience just being educated in China? And I guess how would you kind of compare it to educational experiences in America?
I actually was in the traditional Chinese education system only up to 10th grade. And then at 11th, 12th grade, I went to an IB school, International Baccalaureate. So that's essentially Western system. But yeah, to answer that question, I would say, I think both systems really build students very well. It teaches good virtues, it teaches good values, and it gives the students strong foundation for academics. The only thing that I think is different is China is still transitioning from a very vast, rapid change of like geopolitical landscape. Just 60, 70 years ago, we have, World War and Civil War, and then we have the Cultural Revolution, and then we have, the reform, and the reform is still ongoing, and we enter WTO. And with all of those changes, the message that we are getting growing up is changing with the landscape. That is like you can see like a change in, at the early 1990s, teachers will tell you these values, and then in the 1990s, it's going to be different set, and then in the 2000s, it's going to be another set. It's very interesting to see that. And I think growing up in that rapidly changing time, you get to be more open-minded and adapted to changes. The downside of that, obviously, is at the end of the day, no matter you're from the 1990s or 2000, what your key values are, you have more people than the jobs available. That's just too many people in China. So there's always this very, very competitive examination to college, which I don't know how much you know about, but so you're basically working for 12 years of school for this one exam, and then you are solely judged by your score in that one exam, what kind of college and what major you can get into. And so I think this is unfortunately a very narrow view of how good a person is or how good of a fit it is to this college and major. So that comes to comparison to the US or the Western system is the Western system has been pretty stable. So I feel like, obviously if we compare ourselves to baby boomers, we have different sets of values. But if we go back 20 or 30 years, the values, at least in the US, from what I know with my experience at Rice and onward, has been relatively stable. What is right, what is good, what is wrong, what is acceptable and not, has been pretty stable. So I think growing up here, you are kind of accepting this relatively stable value without the luxury of experience all of these changes and developing insights with those changes. However, the upside of that is here, obviously, you have more job opportunities than China has with all of that huge population. So the educational system here is not like this one-dimensional competitive, like, you're not determined by one exam. So kids here are encouraged to do good extracurricular activities, good sports, good leadership skills, and all of those are going to be considered along with grades when you apply to college. And I like that comprehensiveness. So that's my kind of comparison of these two educational systems.
Thank you so much for explaining. I think that was very helpful. I did a little project for one of my classes that was kind of delving into the Chinese examination, and I was just like so shocked by how much pressure it would be to have everything just like pitted on that one exam. So
right.
Yeah. Going on to, I guess, now coming to the US, what was it like for you coming to Rice for the first time? Like, did you experience any culture shock or discrimination being in Texas? Was it what you expected?
No, I have the luxury to say that I personally, I've been in the US since 2009. I've never experienced discrimination because of my gender or race. I've never felt that myself. I've heard plenty of my friends experience that, but it never happened to me. When I first came to Rice, I was welcomed by my O-Week advisors and Lovett College, and also the physics major community. It's all very diverse. So we have people of different races. And yeah, I literally didn't feel any culture shock. I did feel, though, it's a little bit challenging when I first came here because of the English. Everybody was like, understanding class is no problem. I can understand what the professor said, but chatting with friends, then you're kind of swamped in all of this American slangs. What is this? What is that? So that took me a good 1 or 2 years to ramp up, but I think now I'm pretty good. So,
Do you have any slang words you can remember off the top of your head that were baffling to you?
okay, this is being recorded, so I will stop here, but remember that, purity test that we did when we first came here. Yep, there are plenty of slangs in them. I'm not going to go into each of them. And also the cheers and anti-cheers of each college. Yeah, there is a clean version and there's not so clean version, right? And I I remember I got this friend. He's a like big white bold guy, and I basically just grabbed him and said, explain all of these cheer words to me. And it's like so many inappropriate words and so many slangs. And so he had to explain to this person who just came to the US and doesn't even speak English fluently, all of those words. And I can tell that he was so embarrassed. And I just saw him like, 3 years ago at a reunion, and he still remembered that. He said, Wendy, you toasted me that day. So, yeah.
That's really funny. How big was the international student population like when you came into Rice?
I know there were 54 Chinese students that year.
Wow.
Yeah,
What do you
out of like 800 total. Yeah.
Gotcha. What do you think is something that people are most likely to misunderstand or assume wrongly about Asian immigrants or Chinese immigrants specifically?
Well, like some people say that if you're an Asian at Rice, you're either a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or a loser, right? And I am afraid I fall into the losers category, right? So this kind of stereotypes, I think, is a double-edged sword. It has something bad, it has something good. So the bad part, obviously, like I don't want to be assumed that, okay, all Chinese folks coming to the US will speak with a heavy accent, and all of them are going to be super good at math and science because that makes people who are really good like myself not so outstanding. Just kidding. And so I don't like to be kind of judged with, oh, you must be good at this, you must be good at that kind of thing. And oh, then you probably don't know Super Bowl. You probably don't know Renaissance Festival. You don't get those things. Oh, we got them. Come on, right? And but the good part about this stereotype is that I think it's assumed in the general U.S. society that Asians are very hardworking and they're very reliable and responsible. So it was perceived, at least from what I see, I feel like Asians in the U.S. are perceived as being very hardworking, which is why you can make it through 8 years plus medical school and become a doctor, or even longer hours to be a lawyer or engineer, right? And also Asians are perceived to really be able to provide for their family, for their next generation, and to serve their community. It's this willingness to actually responsibly serve your family and community that I think is a good perception and a rather accurate perception of Asians in America in general. And I kind of like that, and I feel like I also possess those qualities. So
That's very interesting. I'm also wondering, were there any other people in your high school class who applied to Rice? Like, was it common for people, or did you know anyone else who would apply to Texas schools in general?
oh come on, Rice is top 20. And so one thing I noticed for Chinese students and parents, and it's still the case now, is they look at rankings and they value rankings way more than anything else. So because Rice is top 20, I think everybody who get good grades is trying to apply to Rice. For the US students, they may think more about the fit, the school culture, the money, tuition, and even whether it's in the city or suburban and all of that. But I think people in China, because it's so far away and it's a totally different world, totally different system from them, they don't get it. What they get the most is ranking. And getting a degree from a high rank school makes it much easier for you to get good career opportunities if you choose to come back to China after you graduate. So yeah, everybody applies to Rice.
That makes sense. So then, yeah, if they all like use rankings to choose where to go, then when you come back, they all know, oh, you're on the top ranking. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you talk about Texas, are there some certain implications you have with Texas?
I mean, I'm from Princeton, New Jersey, so
Uh-huh.
East Coast, and a lot of people were very, how do I describe, not horrified, but slightly like scared for me, I guess. Like, I think
Oh,
there's
I
a lot,
see.
they were like, oh, you're like gonna be wearing like a cowboy hat and boots, and like you're gonna be carrying your guns, and they're like, no one's ever heard of Rice in the East Coast, which is just very interesting.
Oh,
So
really? Come
yeah,
on.
I know, like literally, it's because I'm literally in Princeton, so I think everyone only knows a lot of like the Ivy
Princeton
around. Yeah,
University? Oh,
exactly.
come on, yeah.
Yeah, so there's not as much awareness of rice.
Mm.
Yeah. Kind of going back to the fact that you've been involved in music, you took all those music classes as well as obviously majoring in physics. I know my experience, I've floated around the humanities a lot, but I know that there's a very heavy like STEM domination like on Rice campus.
Mhm.
Did you, I guess, like, how did you decide to kind of split your time between those two majors, and like what benefits or advantages do you see to being immersed in both?
Um, as I said, I chose to pursue these two fields early on because I know those are the two ways to universal truth and beauty. In terms of splitting my time, I actually definitely put physics as my focus when I was at Rice. And music is kind of, at that time, just very secondary. It was until I had more time after I started working that I put more time in music and actually got certificates and, commit to all of those, software and certifications and courses and trainings.
Got you.
Actually, since you mentioned it, I do want to say that in terms of how I spent my time at Rice, in retrospect, I would do a few things differently. The first would be, I wish I have spent more time connecting with new friends at Rice instead of sitting in a library doing physics or practicing piano or whatever. And the reason being, after I graduated from Rice and entered the workforce, entering the real world, so to speak, I realized that people in the real world mostly care about very realistic, very practical things. Your relationship with your neighbors and your coworkers and people you meet in the bars in a work life is going to be very different from your relationship with Rice classmates. So, for example, I can just walk by Lovett Quad or the library and come across somebody, and with a little pickup line, we can have a very sparkling conversation about what's the meaning of the universe and what is the biggest problem in the society today and what are some possible solutions. And Rice students, usually they're obviously very smart and they are very open-minded. And most importantly, you're in an environment that everybody trusts everybody else so that you're relaxed and can open up and you know that this other person can open up to you and all of those viewpoints. And then everybody is honest and taking what they say seriously. That is an environment or culture that is very different from the rest of the world. Once you get out of the school, then people start talking about, at first, they're not going to talk about the meaning of life or the biggest society problem because number one, there's no that trust. It's like, why am I going to share such intimate things with you, right? And also, people will think about more immediate needs, such as, okay, when am I going to get my salary raise? When is my next vacation? And do I have to go to Hawaii or Bahamas or Alaska? Or I want to buy a house. Where do I buy a house so that I get it the best deal and it will the price will go up in the next couple of decades? Or how should I invest my money to make the most out of it? People are going to talk about these, and if you talk about the meaning of life with them, they most likely will just say some BS to you and end the conversation, right? So I really wish that I cherish this environment, this very sparkling culture at Rice, which I took for granted back then, and I only knew how valuable it was after I lose it. So
I think that's very insightful. And I think it's so sad that like as you go on with life, you would think that you go from this bubble of people asking such important questions and then you continue that. But to see that like it's like the everyday little cares then kind of muddle any, I guess, time that you would have previously spent talking about more important things sometimes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
please cherish that. And I still try to talk to my current fellow coworkers or acquaintances or friends about those topics. It's just that sometimes they don't respond as well as my Rice folks would.
That's very interesting. What would you say has been or was the most challenging aspect of college for you?
I think my mind was too much over the cloud during my college time. Which is actually helpful to my artistic career right now. I was able to win all of these awards and stuff. But back then, when everybody in college was talking about, we have all those big conversations about the meaning of the universe, but we also should have conversations about how to get into graduate school. What is the most lucrative industry right now for us to get into and how to get into it? And what is going to be the next hot industry in 10 years? In 2010 it was bioengineering, but then in 2015 it's big data, and now who knows what it is. And so it's like people are going to be really keeping up with it as a college student, but my mind is over the cloud again. I'm still thinking about music, I'm thinking about universally true physics equations and universally beautiful music pieces and art pieces. And so I was missing out on a lot of practical things that I really should have paid attention to. And as a result, I kind of transitioned to my first job very arbitrarily. And now looking back, I'm like, gosh, I just applied to jobs without really looking, and I got 3 offers and I just picked one and said, yeah, every job is the same. You get a survivable amount of money and you spend a lot of time and you go to work, you go home, you eat, you go to sleep, it's the same. So I took this job, but looking back, I should say, wow, there are so many other industries that I should learn about before I commit to this one. But because my mind was always very artistic and very idealistic, I kind of didn't get that part. And I would say that was a challenge for my college time.
That makes sense. So what industry did you end up going into, and what would you have gone into in hindsight now?
I don't have an answer of hindsight, but I went into energy industry. I'm still in it. I took a little digression for 2 years by working for an ed tech startup. But other than that, I have been in the energy. Basically, I process seismic signal so that we can use sound signal to kind of project that to the underground and then use the reflected sound waves to analyze the underground structures and present those structures to geologists. And then they can look at the structure and judge where we can drill for oil and gas. So that's the industry that I've been in. And after 10 years, I would say I'm established in this industry. I have a name, not a big name, just a small name in certain technical aspects. But in hindsight, I don't know. I could have gone on to get a PhD and be a physics professor. A lot of my classmates at Rice recently got faculty positions. One of them is now a professor at Yale. One is at the US Air Academy. So I'm very happy for them. And, I definitely see myself doing those things as well. And some of them go to the so-called lucrative careers of, let it be investment banking or consulting or big tech. And I also admire their lifestyle. They're great people. I see myself succeeding in those industries if I chose to. I wouldn't say like, oh, I really should have done this particular thing. No, but I just feel like, gosh, I kind of entered this industry very arbitrarily. So.
No, that makes sense. There are so many possible paths, and then you just kind of were like, oh, I ended up in this one.
Right.
Yeah. I am so interested in the film that you helped produce and the score that you made for it. Could you tell me more about just, first of all, how did you get involved in that whole sector? Because I know you had just said you were in the energy industry. So how did you get to the film music part?
Yeah, it's thanks to my network. So this film studio, LiangChen Film Studio, is run by a filmmaker named LiangChen, and he is a Chinese American in Houston. And so I basically get to know him because of my network. I've always been active in the Houston Chinese community at first because I was my brother's guardian. I learned a lot of college planning stuff. So I was doing free college counseling for a lot of other Chinese folks in the neighborhood, and I got a reputation. And so that kind of helped me expand my network. I kind of, a lot of people hear about me. And then because of that kind of so-called followers, I was able to promote my music in that little fan base. And then that expanded, and that finally got into the ear of this director, and he really liked it. He actually looked back, he told me the first piece that he heard of mine was garbage. But then he said, wait a minute, this person is just a physicist and she is buried in the energy industry. How come somebody like that would commit to produce a song like this? So he's like, even though this is a piece of garbage, I will still want to know her and see if she can produce anything that's not garbage. And I think I met his expectations. So
That's really funny.
Several years ago. And after that, we had Stowaways, the movie, and then we have COVID, and we have a couple of other productions, and we are preparing for the next one right now. So.
Wow. What was it like being on set?
Hmm?
What was it like being on set for the movie itself?
I feel like the biggest challenge in here is you're working with a culture that's totally different from corporates. So it's also different from academia. And especially this is true for when we produce Stowaways, because I don't know how much you know about that movie, but it's actually the world's first movie that features undocumented citizens from China to the US, which is why it has won so many awards, because it's such an interesting topic that nobody has touched upon before. And to make it this authentic, a lot of our cast members were authentic immigrants, like they are playing themselves. And so working with these people, you can imagine, even though we're like me and them, we're both Chinese Americans, we're all immigrants from China to the US, but it's so different. Like some of them may have crossed the border 20 years ago and has been, working in underground restaurant kitchens as a cook for 16 hours a day for 10 years without celebrating for Christmas or never see the sun. Some of them may have brought here some money and then just go to casinos and just lose all of that money and have a heavy debt. Some of them may work in a kind of a massage place and then marry one of the clients, and all of those way out of my head stories. And so at first, working with those people was a challenge for me. However, I was able to turn that into an advantage, because after working with those people for a couple of months, I realized we're more similar than different. This is not cliche, but I realized that, hey, this is somebody who has the same blood as me, but they have very different experience. But if you go into them, you realize that essentially you're going through the same thing, the same, feeling of pain, the same love, same hate, and the same fear of things that could happen. Just like they are fearful of being caught that, okay, you don't have an ID or whatever. It's the same thing as when we are fearful of, for example, being fired from our job the next day and have to leave the country. And when we fall in love with our partner or boyfriend, whatever, it's the same kind of love that they fall into. So I realized that there are actually more similarity than difference between our crowd and their crowd, because we all share this root of the Chinese culture. And the beautiful thing about me being in the team is I can translate, because I have the pleasure of being at a very diverse culturally diverse place at like Rice University, and also at Schlumberger, which is very diverse, very international. There are like 20 countries of people in my office, and only 1/3 of them speak English as a first language. And so in my late teens, early 20s, I've been exposed to all of this very, cultural diversity. And I learned how to, like, what different cultures have in common and what they have different, and what is going to be an effective way to communicate to each and every culture, and what is specific to one culture. And so I was able to translate in the filming of Stowaways all of the languages, expressions, art forms that may only make sense to the Chinese culture, to something universal, to something that I feel like different cultures would understand. And I was able to play that part in the production process. And that was so much fun. It makes me a more open-minded person. And I had just grown so much seeing different life forms and, kind of live lives that is way out of my own life. So.
That's super cool. And I love how like the experiences beforehand that you wouldn't even have thought would like help shape like your experience now have like played a role in being able to translate. I was also wondering, is there like a certain character of the movie that you feel like you resonate with some aspect of them or like their experience more than others?
I do feel resonant with one of the main characters. So this guy is nowhere similar to my experience, but I really like the naiveness and pureness that he had. So the story goes like this. This guy illegally crossed the Mexican border to come to the US at the age of 18. And during the crossing, there was another family that crossed with him, also from China, and they didn't meet before. And that family, the husband and the little daughter both died during the crossing because of the river, but the pregnant wife survived. And so this 18-year-old kind of took care of this pregnant wife and took care of her after childbirth and all the way until like 20 or 30 years later. And during this whole time, he has been a cook in a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown of New York, like those underground kitchens, no life. And he used his leisure time to go to casinos, so he was never able to go to school, never able to save up any money, never able to get married. But at the end of the day, so I forgot to mention, this heavily pregnant woman, because she lost her husband, she couldn't afford raising this child herself, and she knew this child is not going to get a good education. So because of that, she actually put this child for adoption, and the child was adopted by a white family. And so this lady lost the child essentially because it's not her girl anymore. It's, now has a adoption parents. And then after so many years, it was this main character, this guy, that reconnected this daughter, now in her 20s and now graduating from Harvard Medical School. That's a stereotype, right? But connected her with her mother. And so what we can see from this guy is that he has nothing to be proud of. He illegally crossed the border, and he always been a cook, and he didn't have education. He didn't have any accomplishments. He even have all of those, undesirable qualities, such as going to casinos and losing all the money. However, there's that kindness and naiveness. Like, he always took care of this lady who he just met during the crossing because she lost her husband. It's that simple kindness. And it was that kindness that drove him to also find this daughter after 20 years so that she could reunion with her mother. And all of that he kind of volunteered to do, and he didn't have to do at all, but he wants to do it because this is trying to serve others, serve the community, and also like kind of triggers a kind of instinctive beauty. Like when you see, somebody reunion with their daughter, there's always that beauty. And so to me, I feel like I sometimes do silly things like that, things that have no immediate benefit to me, but would really, give me joy to help others. And just because I love to see something beautiful happen because of me, such as a reunion of a mother and daughter. And so I feel like also a lot of times I can do bad things or selfish things, just like this guy will go to casinos and lose all of his money, and that's not desirable. But at the same time, I will always want to help others, especially those who are related to me in terms of, cultural roots, or just like, for example, Rise as a family. And now I view my company as a family. All of those people who are somehow related to you, you always want to help them in creating some kind of universal beauty. And that itself is satisfying to me. So that's what I see as I feel related to one of the characters.
Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like that's such a powerful story, and I love how you connected it to yourself as well. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, going to more identity and how you identify yourself. Like, how would you identify yourself ethnically?
Oh, definitely I'm Chinese.
And what do you feel most proud of?
In terms of my identification of being Chinese?
Either that or anything that you've accomplished, or just anything looking back.
Okay, I feel like I identify myself as a both scientific and artistic, and that's something I'm proud of.
I'm wondering too, just jumping back to family and how you said you love to help anyone who's like related to you or in a similar position. You said your immediate family is now living all in the US, correct? Or your biological mom is still in China at a temple?
Well, actually, my dad is in Irvine. My stepmom is in Chengdu, and my biological mother is in a temple in Japan.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Do you think that you would like stay in Houston like for the rest of your life if you could, or is there a place that you would like
No,
to go?
I've been in Houston long enough, and I think at this time where everything is remote, it really doesn't matter where I stay. I do like the US because I feel here there's no such thing as mainstream culture, so that there is no clear social norm. Unlike in many other cultures, China included, I think there is a mainstream, and if you deviate from the mainstream, then you will face some pressure. Like, okay, I'm 32, I'm still not married, I still have no kids. What's wrong with me, right? And in the US, people are not going to ask because US is like a hodgepodge of all of the different cultures, and each of them live in their own ways, and then you mingle and you have like all of these mixed values. So people are not like, if in the US, if people realize that you're different from them, they're gonna say, "Oh, this person is probably coming from a different culture. Guess what? It's an immigration country, so I will just respect them." Instead of in other cultures where there is a mainstream, then people think, "Oh, this person's different from me. Is there something wrong with her or something wrong with me?" Right? So in the U.S., people are not gonna think like that. So I think because of this, I will probably stay in the U.S. So I have less pressure of being weird because I'm both a nerd and a crazy artist, right? In terms of cultural identification, I'm definitely Chinese. Like I will always like Chinese is my first language. I wrote a book in Chinese. I probably will write more. Most of my songs lyrics are in Chinese, and also I'm naturally just attracted to Chinese food. My stomach loves them. I like Chinese fashion and all of that. So
At your heart and soul, you are Chinese.
of course,
Yeah.
I lived the country when I was 18, so all of the key values were set back then.
Mm. Okay, so you did mention your novel, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about the first novel that you authored and what inspired you to write it, and how was that process like?
So it actually was the same reason I joined LiangChen Film Studio and start making music and start, being part of storytelling like the movie Stowaways. So it's a way to kind of express myself in an artistic way that's universally understandable to the rest of the world. So I first chose to express my emotions using words. And so I wrote this 200,000 word novel. It's actually a semi autobiography of my life at Rice. I even kind of named 5 different colleges corresponding to the 13 colleges at Rice. I give them fake names. And then I wrote about my close friends, a couple of them. I changed their names. I'd also make a very tall guy very short and a very, skinny girl very fat. But other than that, it was my true stories. And I was using this as an opportunity for me to express the things that I cannot express because, you can't just go to your friend and say, "Hey, I really enjoyed those conversations with you. Um, I feel like I've been a better person because of you." And you can't go to another person and say, "Hey, I I fell in love with you, but you don't respond. I feel so hurtful. I don't know what to do because, I still am attracted to you." Those things, if you just say it openly to the person, it probably will reduce the power a lot. But if you put this into an art form like a novel, it's going to be much more touching and it's going to be universally understood by a lot of other people. And that's my first attempt. And then after doing that, I realized, okay, nowadays people don't sit down there and spend 10 hours reading a big book anymore. They listen to music, they watch videos, and they do selfies and they do TikTok. And so I realized that maybe if I want to really kind of express my pursuit of truth and beauty, I should use this kind of more popular art forms like music and images and moving images, right? So that's how I ended up here.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's so beautiful that you're able to capture it in words and put it out in that way. On a practical level, how do you manage your time to do so many different projects and work a full-time job while also doing all these different artistic things?
Yeah, so I don't have much of a leisure life anymore. But I think a lot of times changing gear is taking a break. So I would just do a lot of geophysics, thinking about waves, thinking about frequency spectrum, velocity model, and how we try to improve the seismic imaging quality, and a lot of equations, a lot of solving the matrix, solving differential equations. And then boom, all of a sudden next hour, I'm writing some PR to invite the New York mayor, for example, to our next screening of Stowaways in New York. By the way, I'm going to be in New York in 2 weeks for the screening. It's going to be in the Flushing Public Library, and we have invited a lot of big people to join us. And I handle all of those PR. So it's like that changing gear for me is taking a break. And then after doing that, after 2 hours of using ChatGPT to write the invitations and try to proofread it and change the words here and there, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting tired. Okay, back to seismic, more physics, right? And so that's how I feel like I can change gear without really feeling burnt out. And then I always playing the piano and composing and improvising some beautiful tunes is the cure for everything. And if that's not enough, I have the best cat in the world. And so just petting the cat, it's, that solves all the problems.
That makes sense. I guess because it is such different parts of your brain, it makes sense that you could be able to switch like back and forth.
Right.
Yeah. I was also wondering, like, if say you reached a point in one of these facets of your career where you could only pick one, what do you think you would go for?
I definitely will not be able to give one up for the other. So, because I need this scientific career to make money to survive, but I do need the artistic aspect of me to keep me, questing, constantly in quest of the truth and beauty of life. So it's like one is bread and butter, the other is dessert and, delicious food, so to speak.
You need both to have your balanced meal.
Right.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, where and when do you feel most at home?
Mm, can you elaborate on what you mean by at home?
I guess like it's kind of just however you interpret home, or like how would you define home?
Yeah. So sadly, you've got a sore spot of mine, and I don't have an answer to this question anymore. If you asked me when I was in my puberty, where I went to residential school, because I was in residential school ever since seventh grade, then feeling home is actually going home for the weekend. Because then I'm in my own bedroom. I'm not with three other roommates. I don't have to watch my actions all the time. I'm not afraid of being judged. I'm in my own space with my doors closed to my own bedroom. So that is when I feel home the most. And then after I went to Rice, I feel like when I feel home is when I went back to China, when I can sleep in my own bed and eat the authentic food of, the delicious hot pot and other food that you can never get authentically in Houston, right? So that is when I feel the most home. However, after all these years, a lot of people who are important to me, such as my brother, my dad, and kind of my stepmother as well, has moved out of that house and that city or even that country. And so going back, and also some of my close friends, my best buddies from middle school and high school, they're all gone now to different places to pursue their career and lives. And so now I haven't gone back to Chengdu for 6 years. Part of that is COVID. Part of that is there's really no point to go back anymore. So that is a very sad realization in your 30s that, well, if you go back, you have no place to go. The house, It's not your house anymore. And all of the people in that house, some of them passed away, some of them have moved on, some of them remarried, some of them, just go to a different chapter of their lives. So I don't know. Right now, I feel the most home when I'm in my actual house in Houston. And I just see that as my own home. That is where I have my beloved cat. I have a partner who I love, and I do music there. I recently released a music video, and it took me 1 year to compose that music, the lyrics and the melody, as well as the chord progressions, before I sent it to a music producer to actually produce it. And then this director LiangChen was able to make an MV out of it. What I want to say is, it took 1 year, and a lot of the inspirations during those 1 year that moved my music writing forward for this project was when I wake up in my bed in the morning in this Houston house. I wake up, maybe I was dreaming about my older days, and then I wake up, I'm still kind of halfway in my older days, good memories, halfway into the reality. Gosh, I have to go to work in 10 minutes or whatever. And during that transition time is when the inspiration boom. And then all of a sudden I have a really good line of melody or really good line of lyrics. And I wrote it down. And that's how the song got produced. So in this sense, my Houston house is the home of my inspirations and creations. And I will view it as a home now. This would replace what I used to have in my childhood house in Chengdu, as things have changed and important people have, gone apart. So hope that answered your questions.
No, definitely. That's really beautiful. I think to see, like, I guess how the concept of home has like stayed with you in some aspects, the fact that you still find inspiration by like combining the two now, your new home, old home, and what it means now.
So by the way, this question of when you feel home, how you feel home, makes me think of this music video, because I titled it Long Way to Yesterday. It is a song about my own memory and my own, my own healing from the past. Because I have a lot of regret in my mind, not to say I did something wrong, but to say I didn't realize how valuable things were before I lost them. For example, I already touched on one example of how, like, talking to people at Rise to have sparkling ideas and inspiring conversations is something I took for granted. And I didn't spend enough time doing that. Instead, I spent too much time doing homework, trying to get A's in physics and still get B's at the end of my senior year, right? And there are a lot of things like that. For example, when I was in elementary school, I take buses every day to school and come back. And looking back, those public bus rides are so much fun. And every day you see something interesting in the bus. Oh, this woman's fashion. Oh, some very interesting conversation between this old lady and her husband. Like, you see the society in this little bus. And also there are things like big trees. There was I think there still is, a big ginkgo tree in front of my elementary school that's at least 100 years old. It's huge. And we love to play around it, like, the six of us would just hold hand in hand to go around the tree. All of those memories, at that time, I didn't know how meaningful it was, how good it was, until I lost them permanently. And so I used this song as an opportunity for me to talk to my past and say, hey, it's okay. Now I realize how valuable you are, and I will always cherish you in my heart. I'm so sorry that back then I didn't cherish you enough, and now I understand. And so, which is why I named my song Long Way to Yesterday instead of Long Way to Tomorrow, because it's about memory and healing. And I think that I just want to share that as part of answering the question of when I feel home most.
I think that's so beautiful. My last question for you is, what would you say is your life philosophy, or something that you like to hold on to guide you throughout life?
Life philosophy of like what?
of like what you use to kind of guide you throughout your life?
Um, I'm trying to avoid cliche. I would say a lot of my life philosophy come from reading and watching movies and listening to songs and reading religious teachings. And so now it's kind of a mixture of all of them. I take philosophy from the Bible, such as always be kind and always love your neighbors like God loves you. And I take teachings from Buddhism, such as whenever things go wrong, try to take it easy. Don't try to really, take it seriously and understand it and want revenge and all of that, because at the end of the day, everything's empty. I take teachings from movies like Forrest Gump, uh, like realizing that how a person's personal effort is nothing compared to the actual tide of the whole era. And, a lot of times who you are and what you can achieve is a matter of where you is about, being in the right place at the right time and meeting the right people. And I also learned from different songs, different books. There is a book, gosh, I can't remember the name of that book in English because I read it in Chinese, Thikadara. Anyway, it's about a person, it's by Herman Hesse, the Nobel Prize winner of literature. And this book is about the main character who was a Buddhist and was going to be a committed Buddhist in a temple, but he chose to go out and experience the real world for a couple of decades first. So with, the quest of the meaning of life in his mind, he went out to the bigger world and he got married and enjoyed things like good food, wine, and sex. And he also experienced all the hardship like betrayal, cheating, and losing all of his money. And he became very rich and very poor. He was very much in love, and then he lost his loved one. And after all of that, before he died, he realized, hey, now I know the meaning of life. And so I read this very young, and I always read it every 10 years. And those are the things like the Bible and the Buddhism teachings and my favorite movies and books like this. I always go back to find peace in mind and remind me that what I live for is just to find a universal way to express truth and beauty and share that with as many people as I can, and let it be science or art. So that's what I live for.
No, that's really, really cool. I love how you took a similar thread through like just a ton of different texts that you found or different art forms. I guess lastly, is there anything that you would like to add that we've not covered yet?
I guess that's pretty much it. I just want to say thank you to the Child Center, and as a Rice alum, I always keep close connection with the Department of Literature Asian Studies, and I was a close friend of Dr. Chen until her last year. She was an awesome mentor for me. And so I really thank you for this opportunity, and I hope we keep in touch.